one of the things that's really important in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, activism, social justice is the words that we use. Making sure that the words that we're using are the words that we want to use and are conveying the message that we want to convey. So over the past number of years, I have started to shift my vocabulary and being really intentional in the words that I use. So for example, I no longer use the word empower. Years ago, I stopped doing training on unconscious bias and no longer include that in any of the trainings that I do. And something occurred to me over the last week that is a big mindset shift, and it's a long time coming. So if you're familiar with the Table of Diversity, it's a tool that I created that has two purposes. One is to expand our definition of diversity to include all of these aspects of identity, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, but also other things. But it's also to highlight intersectionality and to look at the intersections of identity, but also to look at the systems in which we live through an intersectional lens. And as I was really thinking about the world over the past week, something occurred to me, and that is the word and the phrase and the concept of privilege, specifically white privilege. But first, I want to kind of break it down and kind of walk you all through my line of thinking here. So when I think of the word privilege, let me first share a story. I was working with a colleague not too long ago, and we were doing some work around women in leadership. Most of my work is focused on, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So we were doing some work around women in leadership, and I always, at these women's leadership events, focus on intersectionality. So ensuring that, it's not just a room filled with white women, but there's also women of color, women at various levels throughout the organization from various backgrounds, speaking various languages. You get the gist, all of these aspects of identity. And so in talking about intersectionality and ensuring that we have representation through an intersectional lens, one of the organizers who was a white woman, said, that's a really great point. As a white woman, I have privilege over you. And that stuck with me because I knew where she was coming from. I knew what she was trying to say, but how she said it was 100% wrong, because it's not that she has privilege over me. It's that the systems grant her privileges that I don't have access to. And it's that sort of mindset shift that takes it from you as a person are privileged compared to me. And then it says the systems that we live in grant you a certain level of privilege, grant you a certain level of access, and give you an advantage that I may not have access to, regardless of my identity or my merit. And that's the kind of shift that I want our words to immediately convey when we're talking about things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when we talk about, white privilege, I think that has gotten to a point where folks who consider themselves to be white feel that level of privilege over other groups of people, when it's not quite that simple. It's just that the systems that we have in place grant people from certain communities greater access. They have a different type of advantage. They're granted a certain type of advantage over other people. And to me, that is a huge mindset shift when we're talking about things related to DEI, social justice, activism, things of that nature. The other thing that I think is super important, and this is kind of on another note, but I'm going to come back to the Table of Diversity, is we have to look at it through an intersectional lens. We can't just talk about it through a lens of race, but we have to also talk about it through a lens of race, gender, socioeconomic status. One of the reasons why I think the Poor People's Campaign, which is where Dr. King, turned his focus in the later years of his life before he was assassinated, it's so powerful because there was a lot more people coming together because they weren't making, $400,000 a year. They weren't hitting that threshold where you may be exempt or receive some sort of systemic advantage, systemic access, because you're in that particular socioeconomic status. So when I think about things like that, I often think of, how are we talking about, privilege, which I'm no longer going to use. I'm now focusing on systemic advantage, systemic access, because I think that more accurately represents what's happening here and where we need to focus our attention. When we talk about, white privilege, I think it's gotten to a point where folks are like, okay, I'm white, I'm the problem. And it's like, you may be benefiting from this. You may not be in a hurry to change anything, but at the end of the day, it's the system that we are attacking, the system that we're wanting to dismantle, the system that we want to change. And I don't know if we would go any further into the conversation by this shift in language, but I do think it's necessary to get to where we want to be. So back to the table of diversity. If you're familiar with this tool, then you know that in each column there's at least one element that's in bold, and that element I have always described as the element, the identity that is the most privileged out of that group. I am no longer calling it the most privileged out of that group. I am now referring to it as the system that was, these people, the ones that are in this group, the ones that are in bold, receive a systemic advantage. They have a heightened sense of systemic access than everyone else within that particular group. And to be clear, what they do with it does not determine their success. They could be successful or they could not. But I do think it's important to recognize and to realize that it's the system that we are wanting to adjust and change. And I think that's going to be a huge mindset shift. But also, as we're doing trainings, as we're having conversations, as we're doing this work, it's just going to hit different. It's going to reach into a different part of people's minds when they're like, okay, I know the work that I need to do. I can't change that I'm white, because white privilege, it's a lot of people have taken that to mean, okay, I can't do anything about my whiteness. I can't do anything about my maleness or me being cisgender or, me being able-bodied. But if we think about it in terms of, are you receiving a systemic advantage, or do you have a heightened sense of systemic access, that we can change, that we have control over. And so if you have used the table of diversity within your organization, I am issuing an alert that we are changing how we talk about the elements that are in bold. We are no longer calling those the most privileged identities out of the group. We are now referring to them as groups that are receiving a systemic advantage or have a heightened sense of systemic access. I know that's going to be a mindset shift, but we're going to get there together.